Budget caps have been an ongoing conversation in F1 this season. So far, no one has come out too heavily against them, but there are now claims that 7 teams are going to have to miss the last 4 races of the season. Just think about that for a second. The last 4 races might only have 3 teams at them. Want to know where this incredible claim comes from and how true it is? Well, stick around and you'll find out. Red Bull boss Christian Horner has been given the tongue-in-cheek nickname Karen Horner in the past for his complaining about aspects of the sport. Well, this time he's gone after the budget cap, which is set at $141.2 million this season. Teams have pushed back at a wide variety of rules introduced this season, but this is the first time someone's come out this vocally at the budget cap. After the Spanish Grand Prix, Christian Horner said, "We need the FIA to address this inflationary issue because basically, probably about 7 of the teams will need to miss the last 4 races to come within the cap this year. From the consensus, there has been up and down the paddock. It isn't just about the big teams now. It's the teams in the middle of the field that are really struggling with the inflationary rates that we're seeing. It could even get worse in the second half of the year. The FIA has a duty of care. I know they're taking it seriously. Energy bills, costs of living, costs are going up exponentially, and F1 is not exempt. Freight has quadrupled, and that's not something we can control." At first glance, this seems like an incredible claim from Christian. Teams agreed to this budget cap in 2019, so they have plenty of time to plan and prepare for it. That same year, the Red Bull Formula 1 team spent over $300 million. Admittedly, cutting your budget from $300 million to $141.2 million isn't easy, but when you've had 2 years to plan for it, surely it's achievable. Alpine team principal Otmar Safnauer certainly seems to agree. "We've set our budgets early. We kind of anticipated a little bit of inflation. Inflation didn't creep up on us. If we can do it, for sure others can do it too. I'm not for just increasing the cap." For many of the teams in Formula 1, the $142 million budget cap is an aspirational spend. They don't have that kind of money in the bank. In 2020, the last year without a budget cap, Mercedes spent over $450 million, while Haas spent just $80 million. Just because there's now a budget cap doesn't mean that all the teams can all of a sudden spend that much money. That isn't the reality of the sport. When you have teams like Red Bull and Mercedes with massive coffers at their disposal, they want to spend every cent they can. The more money you spend, the better a car you can build. That's always been and always will be the rule in F1. Sometimes a team with a smaller budget cap will nail a design and succeed, but it tends to be very short-lived. So who else is behind Horner's claim that teams won't be able to turn up to the last 4 races? Well, unsurprisingly, it's the biggest teams in the paddock who could make use of the extra budget. Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren are all known to be in favor of an increase. The reason that's being given is that inflation is skyrocketing at the moment, which means that the cost of pretty much everything is increasing. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, inflation has been on the rise across the globe. In the UK, where Red Bull, Mercedes, and McLaren are all based, inflation rates are at 7.8%. What this means is that, on average, everything the teams buy is costing 7.8% more than it did last year. What about Horner's claims about freight prices quadrupling? The Baltic Exchange Air Freight Index shows that the cost of air freight has been on the rise in recent years. But the price of sending cargo via air peaked at $12.72 per kilogram in December 2021. Since then, it's fallen to $8.18 per kilogram. So why is this now an issue for the teams when it wasn't under the price cap last year? Well, this season there are new car regulations, which means that teams are having to do a lot more research and development. You hear at every race about the major upgrade packages that teams are bringing. That obviously costs money, but Otmar has an answer to this problem as well. When freight cost goes up by 2.5 or 3.5 million, but your development budget is 20 million, can you not make your development budget 17 million and still be under the cap? You can. What that then does is it limits your development. So it's a lot easier if you have the money to go to the FIA and lobby to raise the cap and keep your development budget the same. Otmar has said that his team planned their budget between November and December. Well, since then, the price of air freight has actually dropped by $4.54. I'm not a maths expert, but if the price has dropped by about 36%, that doesn't mean it's quadrupled in price. Obviously, the average price of shipping air freight isn't the most accurate way of working out how much teams are spending on shipping their equipment. They will use the roads and seas when possible because that's way cheaper. But when the teams went from Miami to Barcelona recently, a lot of equipment would have been flown. Inflation is clearly a problem though. The cost of running factories, feeding teams, and paying wages will be increasing, and all of those things will be counted into the budget cap. It isn't just the price of shipping their gear that the teams need to cover. An Aston Martin spokesman said where their team stands on the matter. We support a budget cap increase in line with inflation, but do not see the need for an increase greater than that. F1 management are obviously very aware of inflation. It'll be affecting their accounting books as well. In fact, they said they were reviewing the situation back in April. Formula One Managing Director Ross Brawn said, "I think the inflationary increase needs to be reviewed, because when these rules were developed, inflation was relatively low and predictable, and now it's high and unpredictable. And if you look at the inflation rates that apply to industrial enterprises, like an F1 team, you've got power, you've got raw materials, you've got all the things which are proving to be quite expensive at the moment. So I think there's a solution coming on that. Whether this change is to come in this season though remains to be seen. There's a clause in the budget cap agreement that allows the budget cap for each year to be increased in line with inflation if inflation is over 3%. The cap next year is meant to be reduced to 135 million, but if inflation stays high, it's likely to be much higher than that. Alfa Romeo team boss Fred Vasseur is one of those who accept inflation is an issue, but doesn't think any changes should happen now. You can't change the regulations every single weekend because one team wants to spend more on development, or because they're overweight, or because that they want to have an extra allowance for this, or for this. There is a rule. The most important thing is to stick to the rule. If the concept of inflation and the calculation of the inflation is not the best one, we can think about it for the future. Why not? But we have something in place and everybody agreed when we signed the deal. Now we have to follow the rules. Fred is making reference to the start of the season when teams across the grid were struggling with their weight and asking for budget increases to help them develop solutions. He makes the exact same point that you would expect the FIA to make in response to Horner's request for a price increase for this season though. The teams agreed to the budget cap in 2019. They will have known that inflation was going to happen when they planned their budget before Christmas. Just because Red Bull are unable to cut costs to stay below doesn't mean other teams should be punished. You might ask, how is the budget cap increasing a punishment? But it is. For teams like Alfa Romeo, they were already operating below the budget cap before it was introduced. The budget cap was meant to make the racing more competitive by reeling in the spending of the big teams like Red Bull. Having one team spending almost $500 million on their car while another can only spend $80 million is not healthy for a competitive sport, especially a sport with so few competing parties. If Red Bull can spend an extra $10 million, they're going to be able to develop their car more. Alfa Romeo aren't going to be able to spend an extra $10 million just because F1 says they can. So they get punished because the other teams are able to spend more money while they can't. The development race this season has been frantic, and the competition for the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships looks like it's going to be incredibly close. The top teams will want every cent they can get their hands on to spend on improving their car. That's completely understandable. But unfortunately for those teams who have the money to spend, they agreed to these restrictions and they will now have to stick to them. Will 7 F1 teams not turn up to the last 4 races like Christian claimed? No, that seems incredibly unlikely. They have their own sponsors who pay to be seen on TV by the millions of people who watch F1 every week. What should happen is that the teams who are at risk of going over the budget should reassess their budget and look to make changes. If they can't find anywhere to make cuts, then they're going to go over the budget cap, and F1 will punish them appropriately. There's nothing in the budget cap agreement that states what that punishment might be, but it would probably take the shape of points deductions, as fines will mean nothing to teams like Red Bull and Mercedes. This new era of F1 is meant to be the most competitive in the sport's history. We understand why teams with money want to spend as much as they can to make their car as good as possible. But is that really the best thing for the entertainment value of the sport? Wouldn't you prefer the top 10 cars to change each race, for any driver on their day to have a chance of taking big points or even a podium? We know we would. Want to see more about the problems at Red Bull? Then click the video that's showing on your screen and I'll see you there.